The inside story on the issues that affect you and your community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. I'm Dan Hurley. The city of Cincinnati faces a massive $870 million deficit in its pension fund, funded at only 67% when 80% is considered the minimum recommended level. The fund threatens to consume in future years the annual operating budget of the city, starving other basic functions. Last November, Issue 4 asked voters to deal with the pension issue in ways that were so draconian that all members of City Council opposed the measure, and it was defeated at the polls 78 to 22%. But there's no easy or painless solutions to this problem. I am joined this morning by Cincinnati Council member Christopher Smitherman. Mr. Smitherman put forward a proposal 2 weeks ago. The timing in part reflected meetings that the city faces this month with credit rating agencies. Christopher, welcome back to Newsmakers.
Thank you so much for having me on.
We're going to go through, and I've got sort of the elements of this, but why is this hanging around so long? Why haven't we been able to get to this? We talked about it now for at least 5 or 6 years. What's the problem here?
Well, over the last 10 years, the unfunded liability that you spoke about at $870 million has grown 1,000%. And typically, it's about just kicking the can down the road. I mean, politicians don't want to face this because, you know, the electorate, the voters, the retirees and the current workers, this impacts their daily lives. So this is a very serious issue. But Dan, it is one that threatens the solvency of our city, like it threatened Stockton, California, and Detroit last year in 2013. So it's serious.
You know, as long as you brought up, retirees, current employees.
Yes.
How much does that weigh on your mind? That anything you do here does affect people's plans and people's realities.
It weighs on it very heavy. You know, I got involved with local politics because I wanted to do right things by the city of Cincinnati. This is one of those tough votes that I think council must take in order to protect the retirees, protect the current workers, and protect the city of Cincinnati. And I viewed my motion as a way, the motion is very serious, but it was a way to get this discussion moving because the rating agencies have now come in, they're beginning to look at our books, and we face a very serious situation.
Let's take a look at some of the elements of this proposal that you have laid out. We've got it on a full screen. And one of them is cost of living adjustments will be tied to inflation, but capped at 2%. And not compounded. There's a couple of elements there.
Yes.
First off, capping it at 2%. Now, if you look at inflation over a long period of time, you can go back into the 70s. I went back and looked at everything since 1914.
Right.
Look at the 70s, and it was up at 11%. In recent years, there's only 2 years that it's ever, in the last 10 years, there's only 2 years it ever went above 3%. And I think a lot of us think, oh, 3%, that's kind of where it stands. But it's actually been riding much lower than that. So why 2%?
Well, one, you know, in the 90s, the COLA was raised to 3% compounded.
And we'll talk about compounding in a minute.
That's right. So bringing it back to 2% will save the unfunded liability or save the pension about $180 million. So first, that's the number. So
and when we talk about how much we're behind or how much will be saved, over what period of time?
We're talking 30 years.
30 years,
a 30-year period of time. So what we're attempting to do here is bring that unfunded liability, Dan, back to a point that we can make the annual contribution without disrupting basic services for the city. So we want to be able to make the annual contribution, keep the pension solvent, and then meet our basic needs on an annual basis.
So 2%.
2%. And the, you know, inflation right now has been tracking at 1%. I mean, we're in a period of time where we're really concerned about deflation as far as the economy is concerned. So this 3-year window of time, which if you look at whether it's current workers who are retiring or those who are currently retired, that target for me is a way to say over this next 3-year period, You know, now you're talking about the 3% back to 2%,
right?
But the whole plan deals with those two major pieces that try to cap inflation on what we call a holiday COLA, so that we're trying to say inflation probably won't track above that over the next 3 years.
Okay, so just last year it was 1.5%. The year before 2.1.
That's right.
But capping it at 2. The other real key here is no compounding.
Yes.
Just explain simply what that means.
Well, what happens is every year, let's say over the last 20 years, as the retirees were getting an increase in their monthly benefit, every year that 3% was compounded on last year's increase. So we don't want to continue to pay the compounded interest on the growth of what we gave the previous year.
So does that mean that your 2% will always be based on the salary that you retired at?
Yes.
Not what you got last year?
That is correct.
Okay, so that would hold things down. How much does that save?
That saves around $70 million.
So now we're up to $250 million.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
A second element of this proposal, or another element of this proposal, is a one-time $100 million deposited into the pension fund, preferably this year. Okay, where's the city going to get $100 million?
So there's a lot of discussion here. Part of it I can publicly talk about, and the other part I can't.
Okay.
But the idea of sending the message to council that we can't invest our way out of this problem, that we need to find a way to infuse a present value amount of money into the pension is incredibly important. So that's the purpose of it. Now, there's been discussions about going and trying to do pension obligation bonds and going to the state and asking permission.
So you float a bond.
We float a bond, hopefully at 3 or 4%. With the goal of getting a better return in the equity part of the pension. So that's a very difficult thing to do, and I realize that. The goal of that proposal is to send the message to council and to the administration, Dan, that we need to find a way to infuse cash into the pension. The administration has come forth with a different idea that I'm not prepared to talk about here today, but it might work. And so they're agreeing that there needs to be a present value. It's how we get it done.
And I have a policy on this show. I don't ask people questions that I know they can't answer, so I'm not going to press you on that. But there may be something coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's just take a look at the last element of this that I want to focus on.
Okay.
And that is when this is recovered to a 90% funded, which I presume is what the state will even consider at that point, taking over something, moving this pension obligation of the city over to the state.
Yes.
Do you think the state would even consider that?
I do. They won't consider it now, obviously, with the $870 million unfunded liability. But at 90%, Dan, I think they would. We're the only city right now in the state of Ohio that doesn't have a plan in OPRS. I think Toledo was the last city, don't hold me to that went to OPERS. You know, what we want to do is every year, our annual contribution continues to go higher, 24, 25, 30, 40. You know, we're not there yet. But we can't do 80% of our payroll. So the goal is to try to get our annual contribution back to 14%, which is in line with where OPERS is, or OPERS is, and at that point have a real discussion with them about getting out of the pension business. That is the equity part and the health care part. And it's important, Dan, for me to say that the recommendations that I've put forth only deal with the pension. It doesn't deal yet with the health care bucket. So we have two buckets that we have to address. And right now, my proposal only deals with that bucket. The mayor and the administration want to deal with both buckets at the same time. And I think you're going to see different proposals coming through to deal with both buckets.
Okay. On this, we're talking about that $100 million. Some people have proposed that we sell the Cincinnati Southern Railroad, which, you know, for years only crazy historians like me knew anything about, but it does generate $22 million a year into the budget consistently over time.
Yes.
We are the only city in the United States that owns a railroad. What do you think about that?
So
as the source of that $100 million,
right. It's a $500 million asset, I think.
At least.
300 miles, like you said, of railroad that we own. The annuity part of that payment is so strong, Dan, that I wouldn't want to disrupt it for future councils. And, you know, as one member of council, I want 30 years from now, those councils to be able to have access to what I call this steady annuity payment that's coming into the pension, into the city of Cincinnati. So yes, it's a very valuable asset. Yes, I think in the short term it would solve the issue. I think we have to go about it in a different way.
Okay, just wanted to clarify where you were.
Yeah.
The other thing is, and we're running out of time here, the other thing is that to what extent was our problem created by the downturn in the market back in 2009, and then to what extent is it going to be solved by the market and sort of now reaching a new height? And how much is that going to be cured? How much will it cure itself? And we have less than a minute.
So, you know, the pension was around $2.6 billion. It's now around $2 billion. So we lost about $270 million in that period of time that you're talking about, and we're now building returns or getting returns off a smaller base. So it's impossible to invest our way out of this issue when our $2 billion is not $2.6 billion, and we need to get it to around $3.1 billion in order to solve the issue. So we can't invest our way out of it. We're going to have to bring back some benefits.
Okay.
That's the reality.
Christopher, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on.
We're going to keep talking about this.
It's
important, and the basic point is there's nothing easy or painless about this.
And I care deeply about the retirees and the workers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay tuned. After the break, a discussion with a local author about his new book entitled "And We Called Him Rabbi Abraham," about the fascinating relationship of Abraham Lincoln and America's Jews. Very good.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah. Welcome back. More than 7,000 books have been written about Abraham Lincoln, more than any other American. It might seem that there could not possibly be anything of significance left to learn about Lincoln. But then a book that begins with this quote from a lament by Louis Dembitz, a leading Jew of Louisville, days after Lincoln's assassination, takes the reader aback. You often called him Rabbi Abraham, as if he were one of the nation, one of our nation, of the seed of Israel. But in truth, you might have called him Abraham, the child of our father Abraham. For indeed, there was none who more thoroughly filled the ideal of what a descendant of Abraham ought to be than Abraham Lincoln. Some books on Lincoln bore in on very specific aspects of his political career, his role as president, as military commander, or his personal life. Others, especially those that explore Lincoln's complex and evolving relationship with African Americans and the institution of slavery, open up the dynamics of the 19th century American society. This new book, We Called Him Rabbi Abraham, falls more into the second category, not by focusing on the people of color, but on the relationship between Lincoln and the nearly 200,000 Jews who lived in the United States in 1860. I am joined now by the author, Gary Zola, a professor who is the executive director of the Jacob Rader Marcus Center of the American Jewish Archives, and a professor of the American Jewish Experience at Hebrew Union College. Welcome back to Newsmakers.
Thanks so much, Dan.
I know you've been working on this book for a number of years.
7 years.
7 years,
yeah.
Okay. That's the thing about books. And it is really fascinating. One of the things about this book that I think we should point out is, I think it's your reflection of working in an archives, that there's these sections that have a little bit of 4, 5, 8 pages of commentary, and then the original documents are in there, so you can read them.
Right, that was really developed in collaboration with the publishers, who felt, let's give the people a story, the narrative, and then let's provide the documents with headnotes. So it's hopefully going to be multifaceted, and people can use it in lots of different ways.
It's daunting to take on a book about Lincoln. As I said, there's more than 7,000 that have been written. What is it that you think advances the story? Your book, how does it advance the story?
My book is the very first volume ever that begins to explore Abraham Lincoln's relationship with Jews even before he becomes president, when he's a younger man, building up into the presidency. There was a very good study actually on Lincoln during his presidency and his relationship with the Jews. But then I begin to take Lincoln from the time of his death and his transformation into this icon, and the role that Jews have played not only in shaping Lincoln's image in America, but the role that Lincoln has played not only in Americanizing Jews, but this was the most amazing thing to me, in actually being used, Abraham Lincoln, as almost a Jewish role model. In other words, as if to say, you should be good American Jews because Abraham Lincoln wants you to be. And this was an amazing discovery. So there's so many facets to this book.
In that sense, a lot of what you're doing, dealing with the period after Lincoln's assassination, is dealing with this question of memory.
Right.
Of how Lincoln is remembered in the Jewish community, in the American community as large.
Correct.
And how that interpretation plays into building a culture.
Exactly. I was shocked to discover, actually, the leading role that American Jews played in preserving Lincolnalia. I didn't realize that. In other words, somebody at some point began to say, hey, we have to capture the stories about Lincoln. We have to capture his documents, his letters, his artifacts. Well, that did happen, but when I began to research, I realized that in the foray of that effort were American Jews. Then you have to ask the question, why? What was so interesting to them about this man?
You know, one of the things that you do from very early on is you make the point that in Lincoln's early life, he had these personal relationships with Jews of all different backgrounds, and that there was this sort of continuing personal relationship that then feeds into, I think, sets up some critical moments.
Right.
And one of them deals with a portrait that was done by Samuel Altshuler, which I've got that we can put up. And yeah, here we go. And Altshuler was Jewish.
Right. An immigrant.
An immigrant.
Right.
As most would have been.
Right.
And what's surprising, or did he have choices, or did he make a conscious choice? I'm going to go to Samuel Altshuler because I think he does this best, or whatever.
Well, the way I looked at it is, you know, Lincoln wants to be senator at this time.
Right.
And
1858.
Correct. And what's key here is, if you're going to have an image made of yourself, you want people to look at it and feel that it's a dignified image. I mean, that's the only way in those days that politicians were able to communicate. So this man, Altshuler, who can barely probably speak English and is some photographer he doesn't even know, but sees that he's in Champaign-Urbana for business, he goes up to Lincoln, approaches him, and asks him, hey, can I take your picture? The fact that Lincoln says yes is, to me, an indication of his personality. He's not thinking about, who is this man? What is he going to do? Is this picture going to be any good? Will he make me look foolish? He just says yes. Then, when he goes in to meet Altshuler, Altshuler wants him to dress in a black coat. He doesn't have a black coat. So, of course, Altshuler
wants him to look dignified.
Right, wants to look dignified. So he says, can you wear my coat? And Lincoln, again, instead of saying, listen, let's do this some other time, he says to him, sure. So the only problem, I tell everyone, is that Altshuler's 5'4", right? And Lincoln's 6'4". So when he sits down to put on Altshuler's coat, the sleeves are like this. And this is where, of course, the books that talk about Lincoln's personality, Lincoln had a great sense of humor. You might not know it from those photos, but he had a fabulous sense of humor. He couldn't stop laughing. So the people say, when you look at that photograph, some people say you can see that he's pursing his lips together as if he's in between guffaws. Who knows? But that story was documented by a lawyer who was there with them.
You know, on a really serious level, there are 3 chapters in this book about Lincoln in the White House. You know, and so much of historians, we talk about the Civil War being a time that we remake the Constitution.
Right.
Even the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. In many ways, we talk about it as a second American Constitution. But there's also these three incidents in which Lincoln defends the original Constitution, particularly that First Amendment and the place of religion and government in society.
Right, and often in a very courageous way, right?
Yeah.
So when a law is passed in 1861 to help assemble the Army, and in that law there's a law is passed that says in order to be a chaplain in the United States military and serve, you have to be ordained Christian minister. And Lincoln, when he's approached by the Jewish community, he says, you know, right, we have people in the service already. You can't expect them to be served by...
Yeah, in fact, we have a photo of Michael Allen.
Oh,
here,
right.
Who was appointed briefly.
That's correct. He was the one who started all the problems. You know, he was, it wasn't until they found out he was Jewish that, you know, that he was asked to leave, and this caused the problem. And Lincoln also courageously, I think that the documents indicate that the Jews wanted him to just overturn this law, or to by executive action. And Lincoln says, no, we're going to have to go the hard way. He wants Congress to change the law.
And he gets it done.
And he gets it done quickly.
Yeah.
Quickly, within about 6-7 months.
Right.
And therefore, Lincoln it's true that Lincoln is the first president in all of American history to appoint a Jewish military chaplain.
The second incident was General Grant issued orders after some victories in the South to expel all Jews, is the way it was put.
Jews as a class.
As a class, right, from the Tennessee Military District.
Right.
Which included Kentucky.
Right.
And that meant not only traveling Jews, and there were some incidents that took place that were maybe behind this, but resident Jews, people who lived, particularly in Paducah, Kentucky.
Right.
A whole Jewish community expelled and sent on steamboats up to Cincinnati.
That's correct. Yeah. It's the only time, Dan, in all of American history that Jews were banished from American territory. The only time.
The Jews, a couple of Jews from Paducah, travel to the White House to appeal this.
Yeah.
What happens?
Oh, it's a great story, and the truth is this story, it's a fact, it's a documented fact that in fact this man, Caesar Caskell is his name, from Paducah, Kentucky, who's a businessman and is thrown out of his home. He makes his way from Paducah to Cincinnati, from Cincinnati to Washington, D.C. on January the 3rd at 8 o'clock at night, 2 days after the Emancipation Proclamation. He and a congressman are meeting with Lincoln. And the exchange of conversation cannot really be documented. We know he was there, but this rumor, I have not been able to put my hands on any source, but it's such a fabulous story that you have to retell it. He tells Lincoln that what has happened about Grant's order, and at first Lincoln refuses to believe it. It sounds too
He hasn't
outrageous.
heard of it yet.
Right, he hasn't heard of it, and it sounds unbelievable. So he pulls out his expulsion order. He shows that to the president, and then the president, with his famous sense of humor, says, so I'm given to understand that the children of Israel have been expelled from the happy land of Canaan. And Caskell says that he rejoined by saying, that's correct, Mr. President, which is why we have come unto Father Abraham's bosom for protection. And then the story goes that Lincoln gets serious, and he says, and that protection you'll have. And then he tells the congressman to take this note right now to General Halleck, and he's rescinding the order. He rescinds the order on the spot. And as you know from reading the book, Dan, he gets a lot of guff for it.
Oh,
you would think, oh, everybody would agree with that. What a no-brainer.
None of these incidents were without public debate, and we're almost out of time, but I have to get to the last point because it has echoes to the present.
Right.
And that is an effort to change the Constitution in the midst of the Civil War.
Right. This is this whole issue of whether America should be outspokenly, how shall we put it, in the case of the Constitution, it should declare itself to be a Christian nation, arises during the Civil War. Many religious people begin to feel that the blood and the prolongation of the war is a result of this, and therefore a result of the fact that this Constitution is not declare us to be a Christian nation. So people really want Lincoln to change the Constitution, and he tells them he's sympathetic to their issues, but he needs them to leave him be until the war is over. And Jews take note of the fact that he never raises this issue again.
Right, right. And yet we still hear that today.
Yes. This
is a Christian nation, which it's forgetting what Jefferson and Madison understood about this country. So, great book. Congratulations.
Thank you.
It deserves to be read by lots of people.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.
Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next week to meet the men and the women working to shape our region for the future. Have a good week.